I am Robert Anderson, 74 years old, and somehow still processing the betrayal my own family inflicted 6 years ago. As a successful business owner who built an empire from nothing, I had escaped their toxicity completely. But last Saturday morning, they showed up at my mansion uninvited. Standing on my marble doorstep, my son David cleared his throat nervously. "Dad, we've been thinking about you a lot lately. We saw the house in the newspaper and wanted to congratulate you." His wife Amanda stepped forward with that fake smile I remembered so well. "We realize we handled everything wrong 6 years ago. We'd love to rebuild our relationship." I simply stood there and smiled. What they didn't know was that I'd already called my security company and lawyer the moment I saw them on my cameras. Before I continue this story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. Hit subscribe if you've ever had to stand up to family who threw you away when you needed them most. Living in Riverside during my marriage meant stability to outsiders. But after my wife passed and I lost everything, emotional abandonment hit every corner of my existence. David and Amanda's 4-bedroom house with its granite countertops and 2-car garage became a temporary prison where I wasn't welcome. My small guest room, furnished with their leftover furniture, despite my contributions to their mortgage, became my final stop before homelessness. For 3 months after the funeral, I helped with childcare, contributed my Social Security checks, and tried to stay invisible. I cooked breakfast for the grandchildren, helped with homework, and never complained about sleeping on their uncomfortable pull-out couch. But apparently, asking the kids to say please and thank you was crossing the line. The day they threw me out with 2 suitcases and $847 was the day my real life began. What started as the most humiliating moment of my existence became the foundation for the greatest comeback story this town has ever witnessed. October 20th, 2012. The day started like any other. I was making pancakes for my grandchildren. Tyler and Sophie, while David got ready for work, and Amanda scrolled through her phone at the kitchen table. 3 months of this routine, and I thought we'd found our rhythm. "Dad, we need to talk," David said that morning, his voice carrying a tone I'd never heard before. Cold, distant, like he was addressing a stranger who'd overstayed their welcome. Amanda set down her phone and stood beside him, arms crossed. At 32, she had the kind of sharp beauty that cut people when they got too close. Her expression told me everything I needed to know before she even opened her mouth. "Robert, this arrangement isn't working anymore," she announced, stepping forward like she owned the conversation, which apparently she did. "You're too set in your ways. The children are confused about who's in charge here." I looked at David, waiting for him to defend me, waiting for him to remember that I was his father, the man who had raised him alone after his mother left when he was 9. The man who worked 3 jobs to put him through college. Instead, he avoided my eyes like I was a panhandler asking for spare change. "What exactly am I doing wrong?" I asked, setting down the spatula. My voice was smaller than I intended. "You undermine our parenting decisions," Amanda replied with a shrug that would haunt me for years. "Yesterday you told Tyler to say please when asking for juice. That's not your place anymore." I stared at her. I asked my grandson to use basic manners. "You're confusing the children about authority," David mumbled, still not looking at me. "Amanda's right. It's causing problems." The pancakes started burning on the stove, but nobody moved to flip them. The smell filled the kitchen while my world crumbled around me. "Where am I supposed to go?" I asked. "That's not our problem anymore," Amanda said matter-of-factly. "You're a grown man, Robert. Figure it out." I felt something break inside my chest. Not my heart exactly. Something deeper. The part of me that still believed family meant something. "David," I said quietly, "please." For a split second, I saw a flicker of the little boy who used to cry when I left for work, the child who would wait by the window for me to come home. Then Amanda touched his arm and his face went blank again. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be, Dad." 20 minutes later, my entire life fit into 2 suitcases and a cardboard box. 74 years of memories, photographs, and keepsakes reduced to what I could carry. The rest would go to Goodwill, Amanda informed me cheerfully, as if she was doing me a favor. The taxi should be here soon, David said, checking his watch. He couldn't even look at the bags he'd packed for me, my own son throwing me away like garbage. I stood on their front porch in the October cold, watching through their window as Amanda was already discussing paint colors for what had been my temporary bedroom. She was redecorating before I'd even left the driveway. The yellow cab pulled up as the first drops of rain began to fall. The driver, a kind-looking man in his 50s, helped me load my belongings without asking questions. Professional courtesy for someone who'd clearly hit rock bottom. "Where to?" he asked gently. I gave him the address of the only motel I could afford, the Riverside Inn on Route 9, $45 a night for a room that would become my home for the next 6 weeks. As we drove away, I caught one last glimpse of David in their kitchen window. He was watching me leave, his hand pressed against the glass. For a moment, I thought he might change his mind. Run outside. Tell the driver to stop. Apologize and ask me to come back. But Amanda appeared beside him, and he stepped away from the window. I had $847 in my wallet. No job and nowhere to live. What I didn't have was the slightest idea that this humiliation would become the fuel for the greatest comeback story of my life. The woman at the motel check-in counter took pity on me immediately. "How many nights?" she asked softly. "I'm not sure yet," I replied honestly. She slid an extra towel across the counter. "Take your time, honey. We'll figure it out." That night, lying on a bed that smelled like industrial cleaner and broken dreams, I made myself a promise. I would never again depend on anyone who could throw me away. I would never again let someone else decide my worth. I just had no idea how spectacularly I was about to prove that promise. The Riverside Inn wasn't exactly the Ritz-Carlton. $45 a night bought you a room that smelled like industrial disinfectant and decades of other people's desperation. But it had 4 walls, a door that locked, and after being thrown out like trash, even that felt like luxury. The first morning was the hardest. I woke up forgetting where I was for about 10 seconds. Then reality hit like a freight train. No grandchildren's laughter down the hall, no family breakfast to prepare. Just me, a broken air conditioning unit that sounded like a dying whale, and the crushing weight of starting over at 74. But here's what David and Amanda didn't count on. I'm not the kind of man who stays down. Never have been. When David was young and we had nothing after his mother left, I worked 3 jobs to keep us afloat. I cleaned offices at night, did bookkeeping during the day, and picked up weekend shifts at the hardware store. Survival wasn't new to me. I'd just forgotten how good I was at it. Every morning I walked 12 blocks to the public library. Free internet, free air conditioning, and most importantly, free access to job listings. At 74, nobody was exactly lining up to hire me. Age discrimination is real even when they can't say it out loud. But I wasn't looking for charity. I was looking for opportunity. "You have experience in bookkeeping?" asked Linda Parker, owner of Parker's Garden Center, during my 4th interview that week. She was about my age, with dirt under her fingernails and a no-nonsense attitude I immediately respected. 25 years, I replied. I handled all the finances for my late wife's accounting practice and managed our personal investments. What I didn't mention was that I'd already spotted at least 4 ways she was losing money just from sitting in her cluttered office for 15 minutes. The inventory system was chaos. She was overpaying suppliers, her pricing structure hadn't been updated since 2008, and her employee scheduling was costing her overtime she didn't need to pay. "The pay isn't much," Linda warned. $16 an hour part-time, 20 hours a week max. When do I start? That first paycheck was $256. After 6 weeks of watching my savings evaporate like water in the desert, Earning money again felt like breathing after being underwater. I treated that check like I'd won the lottery. The Riverside Inn slowly transformed from temporary hell to something resembling home. I bought a small coffee maker from the thrift store, hung up my few family photos, and even splurged on a plant for the windowsill. If this was my life now, I was going to live it with dignity. 3 weeks into the job, I made my first real move. Linda was struggling with her quarterly taxes, papers spread across her desk, like a tornado had hit. "Let me help with that," I offered during my lunch break. "Robert, you don't have to work for free." "I'm not working for free. I'm investing in our future success." 2 hours later, I'd reorganized her entire filing system and identified $1,200 in tax deductions she'd missed. Linda stared at the papers like I'd performed magic. "How did you find all this? Experience and fresh eyes. You've been too close to the problem for too long." That afternoon, Linda offered me full-time hours and a raise to $18 an hour. But more importantly, she started asking for my opinion on business decisions. For the first time in months, someone valued what I had to say. The real breakthrough came in November. Linda was walking through the greenhouse, shaking her head at rows of plants that looked half dead. "Waste of money," she muttered. "Every year, same story. End of season clearance, and half this stuff goes straight to the dumpster come December." I followed her down the aisles, examining the supposedly dying plants. Most were just dormant, stressed from the temperature changes and reduced watering schedule. With the right care, they could be spectacular next spring. "What if they don't have to be waste?" I asked. Linda stopped walking. "What do you mean? These plants aren't dead. They're sleeping. Give me a dozen of the worst ones. Let me take them home and see what happens." "Robert, I can't pay you to take home dying plants." "You're not paying me. You're giving me plants you were going to throw away anyway. If I can bring them back to life, we split the profit when they sell next spring. If they die, you've lost nothing." Linda looked at me like I'd suggested we start selling unicorns. But business is business, and she understood the math. Zero investment potential profit. "Take 20, she said, "but I'm not responsible if your apartment turns into a jungle." I loaded 20 of the saddest-looking specimens into my Honda Civic that evening. Plants that any normal person would have given up on. Wilted brown, forgotten. I had no idea I was about to discover the talent that would change everything. By the time I got them home to my motel room, I was already forming a plan. These plants reminded me of something. They reminded me of myself 3 months ago. Written off, discarded, left for dead. But just like me, they had more life in them than anyone imagined. My motel room became a laboratory that November. 20 dying plants scattered across every available surface. The windowsill, the dresser, even the bathroom counter next to the sink. Mrs. Rodriguez at the front desk thought I'd lost my mind. "Senor Robert, you turning your room into a greenhouse?" she asked when I carried in my 3rd bag of potting soil from the dollar store. "Something like that," I replied, not entirely sure myself what I was doing. The first week was trial and error. I had no formal training in horticulture, just instinct and determination. I researched everything I could on the library computers. YouTube videos about plant revival, gardening forums where people shared miracle recovery stories, agricultural extension office publications about dormancy and stress recovery. The breakthrough came when I stopped thinking like an amateur and started thinking like a businessman. These plants weren't just dying. They were assets that had been mismanaged. Poor watering schedules, wrong soil conditions, inadequate light exposure. Problems that could be solved with the right systems. I created a spreadsheet tracking each plant's condition, treatment schedule, and progress. Watering rotation every 48 hours. Gradual light exposure using the motel room's single window and a cheap desk lamp from Walmart. Soil amendments with coffee grounds from the lobby and crushed eggshells from my breakfast routine. By December, something magical started happening. Green shoots appeared on plants that had looked completely dead. Buds formed on stems I'd almost thrown away. My cramped motel room was transforming into a jungle of healthy, thriving vegetation. The other motel residents thought I was running some kind of illegal operation. Mr. Patterson from room 12 kept asking if I was growing marijuana. "Too many plants for one old man," he'd mutter whenever he saw me carrying watering cans down the hallway. But I wasn't growing anything illegal. I was growing hope. Linda Parker's reaction, when I brought the first recovered plant back to the garden center, was worth everything I'd been through. "Robert, what the hell?" she gasped, examining a flowering begonia that had been brown and wilted 6 weeks earlier. "This looks better than when it was new." "Told you they weren't dead," I said, trying to hide my grin. Inside, I was doing cartwheels. This wasn't just about proving a point. This was about discovering I had a talent that could actually make money. "How much do you want for it?" I'd rehearsed this moment. "Half of what you'd normally retail it for." Linda bought that single plant for $12. $12 for something she'd literally been planning to throw in the dumpster. The profit margin was incredible. "Bring me everything else you've rescued," she said immediately. Over the next 2 weeks, I sold 19 more plants for a total of $234, more than a week's wages at my regular job, and this was from one batch of discarded inventory. Word spread through the local gardening community faster than I'd expected. "That man at Parker's can bring anything back to life," people would say. Within a month, Linda was getting calls from customers asking specifically for Robert's rescue plants. But the real game changer came when other garden centers started calling. "Linda Parker gave me your number," said Marcus Thompson from Thompson's nursery across town. "I heard you do something with dead plants. I've got 3 truckloads of clearance inventory I'm about to dump. Interested?" 3 truckloads. That was more plants than I could handle in my motel room, but it was also more opportunity than I'd seen in months. "I'll need to see them first," I told Marcus, "and I'll need a bigger workspace." That weekend I toured Thompson's backlot, where hundreds of plants sat dying in the November cold. Most people would have seen garbage. I saw potential worth thousands of dollars. Linda helped me negotiate the deal. I could take everything Thompson was planning to discard, rehabilitate them through the winter, and we'd split the profits in spring. Thompson got rid of waste he'd normally pay to haul away. I got inventory to build a real business. The storage unit I rented for $60 a month became my first official facility. 10 by 12 feet of space where I could control temperature, humidity, and light exposure. I invested $200 in proper grow lights and another $100 in professional-grade potting supplies. By February, I had over 200 specimens in various stages of recovery. My success rate was approaching 75%. Plants that any normal person would have written off were flourishing under my care. The financial numbers were staggering. My initial investment of maybe $400 in supplies and storage was generating returns of over $3,000 per recovery cycle. Even after splitting profits with the garden centers, I was making more from plant rehabilitation than from my bookkeeping job. But the real satisfaction came from something deeper. Every healthy plant I saved felt like proof that being discarded didn't mean being worthless. Some things just needed the right care, the right attention, and the right person who could see their potential. David and Amanda had thrown me away, assuming I'd wither and disappear. Instead, I was putting down roots in soil they'd never even imagined existed. The phone call that changed everything came on a Tuesday in March. "Robert, this is Grace Rodriguez from the Small Business Development Center. Linda Parker recommended I speak with you about what you're doing with plant rehabilitation. I think you might be thinking too small." Grace Rodriguez, the woman who would help me understand that I wasn't just saving plants. I was solving a multi-million-dollar industry problem that nobody else had figured out how to address. "How small?" I asked. "How would you feel about taking this nationwide?" That's when I realized my little side business was about to become something much bigger than revenge against the family who'd abandoned me. It was about to become an empire. Grace Rodriguez wasn't what I expected when I walked into the Small Business Development Center that Thursday morning. I'd pictured some young MBA with theories but no real-world experience. Instead, I found a sharp, efficient woman in her 50s who could spot potential from across the room and wasn't afraid to push people toward it. "You're not in the plant rehabilitation business," she told me after reviewing my spreadsheets for exactly 12 minutes. "You're in the business of turning waste into profit." That's a completely different conversation. Grace helped me see what I'd been too close to notice. I wasn't just saving plants. I was solving a major industry problem that had been costing garden centers millions of dollars annually for decades. "Walk me through the numbers again," she said, pulling out a calculator. "How much inventory does the average garden center throw away each year?" "Based on what I've seen, maybe 20 to 30% of their seasonal stock. Call it $50,000 worth for a mid-size operation. And your recovery rate, 75% with proper care and timing." Grace's calculator started clicking. "So you're potentially turning $37,500 of waste into sellable inventory. Even at 50% of retail value, that's $18,750 in recovered revenue per location." The numbers were staggering when she laid them out like that. But Grace was thinking even bigger. "What if you franchise the process?" she suggested. "Teach other people to do what you do. License your methods, take a percentage of their profits, and scale this operation nationwide." The idea was both terrifying and thrilling. Me, a 74-year-old man who'd been homeless 18 months earlier, running a national business. But the logic was undeniable. "How many garden centers are there in the United States?" Grace asked. "I have no idea. 16,000 registered retail nurseries according to the last agricultural census. If even 10% adopted your system, that's 1,600 locations generating recovered revenue. Your licensing fees alone could be substantial." We spent the next 6 months developing a comprehensive business plan. I would start with a proper facility in Riverside, perfect the rehabilitation process document, everything step by step, and then begin licensing the method to operators across the country. The SBA loan application was 49 pages of pure torture. I nearly gave up 4 times trying to articulate why this wasn't just some old man's hobby, but a legitimate solution to a real industry problem. Grace pushed me through every section, helping me translate street-smart experience into business school language. "Mr. Anderson," the loan officer said during my final interview, "your financial projections seem quite optimistic for someone with no formal business experience." I leaned forward with the confidence of someone who'd already proven skeptics wrong. "Sir, 2 years ago I was living in a motel room with less than $1,000 to my name. Last year I turned $60,000 worth of discarded plants into over $200,000 in revenue using nothing but a storage unit and determination. I'd say my track record speaks for itself." The $160,000 loan approval came through on a Tuesday in March. I signed those papers in Grace's office, my hands shaking slightly as I realized I was now responsible for more money than I'd ever imagined touching. Within 4 months, I'd leased a 5,000-square-foot warehouse on the outskirts of town. The space was perfect. High ceilings for proper air circulation, loading dock access for efficient plant transportation, and enough room to process thousands of specimens simultaneously. Hiring my first employees was both exciting and nerve-wracking. Tommy Martinez, 19 years old, had been written off by everyone else, but had an incredible intuition for plant care. Patricia Williams, no relation, was a retired teacher who brought organizational skills that transformed our documentation process. "Mr. Anderson," Tommy said during his first week, "why do some plants respond faster than others to the same treatment?" It was the right question from someone who actually cared about understanding the work, not just collecting a paycheck. "Because every plant is an individual," I explained. "Same species, different stress factors, different recovery needs. That's why we track everything separately." By the end of year 3, Phoenix Garden Recovery had contracts with 18 garden centers across 4 states. Our success rate had improved to 82%, and we were processing over 15,000 plants annually. The breakthrough moment came when Linda Parker, who'd taken that first chance on me, decided to sell her garden center and become one of my licensed operators in Florida. "Robert, watching you build this from nothing has inspired half the business owners in this town," she told me during her retirement party. "You've changed my whole perspective on what's possible at our age." The franchise model was working better than Grace had projected. Each licensed operator paid an initial fee of $15,000 for training and equipment, plus 8% of their recovered plant revenues. Within 18 months, I had 12 operators across 7 states. But the real validation came when Marcus Thompson from Thompson's Nursery, the man who'd given me my first big break, called with an unexpected proposal. "Robert, I've been watching what you've built. Home Depot's regional headquarters wants to meet with you about implementing your system in their garden centers throughout the Southeast." Home Depot. The conversation I'd dreamed about, but never thought would actually happen. 2 weeks later, I was sitting in a conference room in Atlanta, wearing my best suit and trying not to feel intimidated by the corporate environment. "Mr. Anderson," said David Chen, their sustainability director, "your success story is exactly what our industry needs to hear. Turning waste into profit while helping the environment. That's the future of retail." The consulting contract they offered was worth more than I'd made in my entire first year of business. But more importantly, it was validation that this wasn't just a local success story. This was a scalable solution to a national problem. Flying home from that meeting, looking down at the clouds from 30,000 feet, I thought about the journey from that motel room to this moment. Every rejection, every small victory, every plant I'd saved had led to this opportunity. Phoenix Garden Recovery was no longer just my second chance. It was becoming my legacy. The irony wasn't lost on me. David and Amanda had thrown me away, assuming I was worthless. Now I was building a business empire based on proving that nothing is ever truly worthless if you know how to see its potential. But success brings its own challenges. Managing 12 locations, training new operators, maintaining quality standards across multiple states. Grace had warned me that scaling would test everything I thought I knew about business. "The question isn't whether you can make this bigger," she said during one of our quarterly reviews. "The question is whether you can make it sustainable without losing what made it special in the first place." That question would define the next phase of my journey. By year 5, Phoenix Garden Recovery had grown beyond anything I'd imagined possible when I was sleeping in that motel room. We were operating in 14 states, with 52 licensed operators, and I'd just signed a consulting contract with Home Depot's regional headquarters that was worth more than most people make in a lifetime. "Mr. Anderson," said David Chen, during our quarterly review in Atlanta, "your sustainability metrics are exactly what corporate America needs to embrace. Profit with purpose." I smiled politely, still getting used to being treated like an industry expert instead of someone's inconvenient father. The transformation hadn't been easy. There had been plenty of 18-hour days, failed experiments with new plant varieties, and moments when I wondered if I was in over my head. The learning curve was steep. Managing 50 locations meant dealing with 50 different personalities, 50 sets of local regulations, and 50 unique market conditions. Some operators excelled immediately. Others needed constant guidance. A few had to be terminated when they couldn't maintain our quality standards. "You're running a real company now," Grace reminded me during one of our monthly strategy sessions. "That means making hard decisions about people who aren't performing." The hardest part was letting go of Jerry Sullivan in Phoenix. He'd been one of my first operators, enthusiastic and eager to learn. But after 6 months, his recovery rates were consistently below 60%, and customer complaints were mounting. "I don't understand it," Jerry said, when I flew out to assess his operation. "I'm following all the protocols you taught me." Walking through his facility, the problems were obvious. Inconsistent watering schedules, poor temperature control. Most critically, he was trying to rush the recovery process to maximize throughput instead of focusing on plant health. "Jerry, this isn't a factory assembly line," I explained. "Every plant needs individual attention. You can't sacrifice quality for quantity." But Jerry never adjusted his approach. Terminating his license was necessary but painful. This wasn't just business anymore. These were relationships with people who'd trusted me with their investments and dreams. The success stories made the difficult decisions worthwhile. Patricia Williams, my former employee, had opened her own operation in North Carolina and was generating over $300,000 in annual recovered revenue. Tommy Martinez had moved to Texas to start a location focused specifically on desert plants and succulents. "Mr. Anderson, I never thought I'd own my own business." Tommy told me during a visit to his Austin facility, "You didn't just teach me about plants. You taught me about seeing potential where other people see problems." The financial success was staggering even to me. Phoenix Garden Recovery was generating over $2.3 million in annual revenue through licensing fees and consulting contracts. My personal net worth had crossed the seven-figure mark, a number I'd never imagined reaching at any age, let alone in my 70s. But money wasn't the most satisfying part. The real victory was proving that experience and determination could compete with youth and credentials in the modern economy. Every contract signed, every new location opened, every success story was evidence that David and Amanda's judgment had been spectacularly wrong. My personal life had stabilized too. I'd moved from my studio apartment to a beautiful two-bedroom place in Riverside's historic district, complete with a garden where I could test new rehabilitation techniques. The space had character, crown-molding hardwood floors and tall windows that let in perfect morning light. Real friendships had developed. Grace and I met for coffee every Wednesday to discuss business strategy and life philosophy. Linda Parker visited from Florida quarterly, and we'd spend hours talking about the early days when neither of us imagined this success was possible. The weekly book club I'd joined had become a highlight of my social calendar. 5 retired professionals who'd all reinvented themselves in their later years. We read everything from business biographies to historical fiction, and our discussions often ran past midnight. "Robert, you've inspired all of us to think bigger about what's possible," said Eleanor Matthews during one of our meetings. "Watching someone our age build an empire from scratch, it's changed how we view retirement." Investment opportunities started presenting themselves. Other entrepreneurs sought my advice and partnership. I began investing in small businesses that reminded me of my own journey. A restaurant owner struggling with food waste. A furniture maker who specialized in repurposing discarded materials. A technology startup focused on sustainable inventory management. The pattern was always the same. Someone had identified a problem that everyone else accepted as unavoidable cost of doing business. But with the right systems and determination, these problems could become profit centers. "Have you thought about expanding internationally?" asked Marcus Thompson, who'd become my business attorney during our quarterly review. "We've been getting inquiries from Canada and the UK." The temptation was real, but I'd learned to think carefully about growth for growth's sake. "One step at a time," I replied. "I want to make sure we're doing this right before we get too ambitious." The truth was, I was already thinking about the next phase. The plant rehabilitation business had taught me that profitable opportunities were hiding in plain sight everywhere if you knew how to look for them. Waste streams that could become revenue streams, discarded resources that could be transformed into valuable assets. But expansion would have to wait. Something more important was about to demand my attention. The phone call came on a Tuesday morning in October, 5 years to the day after David and Amanda had thrown me out of their house. "Mr. Anderson, this is Jennifer Walsh from Prestige Properties. I have a listing I think might interest you. The Wellington Estate in Oakwood Heights just came on the market." Oakwood Heights. The neighborhood where David and Amanda had always dreamed of living but could never afford. The area they'd drive through on Sunday afternoons, pointing at houses and fantasizing about someday while struggling to make their own mortgage payments. "What's the asking price?" I asked. $4.5 million. I didn't hesitate. "I'd like to see it this afternoon." The Wellington estate was everything I'd expected and more. 12,000 square feet of pristine colonial architecture sitting on 8 acres of perfectly manicured grounds. Master suite with fireplace. Library with floor-to-ceiling mahogany shelves. Chef's kitchen that could cater a wedding. And a conservatory that was essentially a professional greenhouse attached to the house. But what really sold me was the view from the master bedroom window. You could see the entire town of Riverside spread out below, including the modest neighborhood where David and Amanda lived with their teenagers who barely remembered having a grandfather. Every morning I would wake up and literally look down on the people who'd looked down on me. Justice has its own geography. The house hunting began as a practical decision and ended as an act of pure, beautiful justice. After 5 years of apartment living, I needed more space for my expanding business operations and investment portfolio. What I found instead was the perfect way to announce to Riverside that Robert Anderson was no longer the man anyone could throw away. "The Wellington estate," Jennifer Walsh repeated when I mentioned the property during our initial consultation. "Mr. Anderson, that house hasn't been on the market in 30 years. It's the most prestigious address in Oakwood Heights." Oakwood Heights. The neighborhood where David and Amanda had always dreamed of living but could never afford. The area they'd drive through on Sunday afternoons with Tyler and Sophie, pointing at mansions and talking about someday while struggling to make payments on their modest 3-bedroom colonial. "Is it for sale?" I asked simply. Jennifer hesitated. "Well, yes, but the asking price is $4.5 million. Let's take a look." The Wellington estate exceeded every expectation. 12,000 square feet of pristine colonial architecture sitting on 8 perfectly manicured acres. The master suite featured dual fireplaces and a walk-in closet larger than my first apartment. The library had floor-to-ceiling mahogany shelves that could hold thousands of books. The chef's kitchen could cater events for 200 people. But what really captivated me was the conservatory. An attached greenhouse with professional climate controls, automated irrigation systems, and enough space to house 1,000 plants. This wasn't just a house. It was a statement about what was possible when someone refused to stay discarded. "The sellers are motivated," Jennifer explained as we toured the wine cellar. "They've already relocated to Florida and want a quick closing." "Cash offer," I said without hesitation. $4.1 million, close in 2 weeks. Jennifer nearly dropped her briefcase. "Mr. Anderson, are you certain that's an enormous commitment?" I was more than certain. Phoenix Garden Recovery was generating enough monthly profit to cover any mortgage payments easily, and my investment portfolio had grown to where I could handle the down payment without touching business accounts. But more importantly, I could afford it because I'd earned every dollar through intelligence determination and refusing to accept other people's definitions of my worth. The sellers accepted my offer within 4 hours. Apparently, cash talks louder than sentiment when you're trying to liquidate assets quickly. 2 weeks later, I stood in the grand foyer of my new home holding keys to more square footage than most people see in a lifetime. The marble floors reflected light from a crystal chandelier that cost more than David's annual salary back when he'd had a job. The moving process was almost comical. My furniture from the 2-bedroom apartment looked ridiculous, scattered throughout rooms designed for much grander living. I'd need to do serious shopping, but that was a problem I was happy to have. I spent my first evening on the massive back deck watching sunset paint the sky pink and gold over my 8 acres of private property. The silence was profound. No traffic noise, no neighbors arguing through thin walls, just peace and space and the deep satisfaction of a goal achieved. My phone buzzed with a text from Grace. "Saw the real estate transfer in the newspaper. You magnificent man. Champagne celebration this weekend." I typed back, "Bring the good stuff." We're toasting to new beginnings. What I didn't type but was thinking was that some beginnings require endings. And I had a feeling the ending to my relationship with David and Amanda was about to become very interesting. The view from the master bedroom window was everything I'd hoped it would be. Rolling hills, mature oak trees, and in the distance the modest neighborhood where my son lived with his family. Every morning I could wake up and see the town spread out below me like a map of my journey from rock bottom to the very top. Tomorrow I'd start the process of furnishing my new life appropriately. Professional interior designers, custom furniture, art collections, all the trappings of success that money could buy. But tonight I simply enjoyed the view from the summit. The scared, broken man who'd been thrown out like garbage 6 years ago was officially dead. In his place stood someone who owned the most expensive house in the county, employed over 100 people across 14 states, and had transformed an industry that had been throwing away millions of dollars annually. The real estate transfer would hit the local newspaper tomorrow morning. Property transactions over $1 million always made the business section in a town like Riverside. David and Amanda would read about it over their morning coffee, assuming it was a typo or some mistake in the reporting. It wasn't a mistake. It was a message. The doorbell would ring soon enough. 24 hours, maybe 48 at most. Greed has its own timeline, and 6 years of silence would evaporate the moment they realized exactly how wrong they'd been about their worthless set in his ways, father. I was ready for that conversation. I'd been preparing for it since the day they'd put my suitcases on their front porch and told me figuring out my life wasn't their problem anymore. Now their problems were about to become mine to solve, or not solve depending on how generous I was feeling. The view from the top was spectacular, and it was just the beginning. The doorbell rang at 9:17 on a Saturday morning, exactly 24 hours after the real estate transfer hit the Riverside Daily News. I was in my new kitchen still figuring out which of the 12 cabinets held the coffee mugs when I heard that familiar Westminster chime echoing through my marble foyer. Through the security monitor, because yes, my house came with a system that would make the Pentagon jealous, I saw them standing on my front porch like door-to-door missionaries. David looked older, grayer around the temples, wearing khakis and a polo shirt that screamed weekend dad trying too hard. Amanda stood beside him in designer jeans and a blazer that probably cost more than I used to make in a month. Behind them were 2 teenagers I barely recognized. Tyler, now 16, had inherited his father's height, but thankfully not his weak spine. Sophie, 14, looked like Amanda, but with kinder eyes. 6 years of their childhood stolen from both of us because their parents had priorities that didn't include inconvenient elderly relatives. I took my time walking to the front door, my bare feet silent on the heated marble floors. 6 years of silence, and they show up the day after they discover I'm rich. The timing was so perfectly predictable it was almost insulting. "Well, well," I said, opening the door, but not the screen. "David, Amanda, children I barely know. To what do I owe this unexpected pleasure?" David's voice cracked slightly. "Dad, we read about the house in the newspaper. We wanted to congratulate you." "How thoughtful. Congratulations delivered. Anything else?" Amanda stepped forward with that bright, fake smile I remembered so well. "Robert, we know things ended badly between us 6 years ago. We've had time to reflect, and we realize we handled everything wrong." "Handled everything wrong," I repeated slowly. "Is that what we're calling it?" Tyler shifted uncomfortably behind his parents. "Grandpa Robert, I barely remember you, but Mom and Dad said you used to tell amazing stories about when Dad was little." The boy's innocent comment hit harder than his parents' rehearsed apologies. He was right. He barely remembered me. Because they'd stolen 6 years of his childhood from both of us. 6 years of birthdays, school plays, soccer games, and grandfather-grandson moments that we'd never get back. "I did tell good stories," I said softly, looking at Tyler. Then I turned back to his parents. before I was thrown out like garbage. Dad, please, David pleaded. Can we come in? Can we talk? Talk about what exactly? Amanda's mask slipped for just a moment, revealing the calculating woman underneath. We're family, Robert, and family should stick together, especially when there's room for everyone. There it was. The real reason for their visit delivered with all the subtlety of a sledgehammer. Room for everyone, I mused. How convenient that you've discovered your family feelings now that I have 12,000 square feet. That's not fair, David protested, but his eyes were already cataloging what he could see of the house interior. We've missed you. The kids have missed having a grandfather. I laughed, actually laughed at the audacity. David, son, you threw me out of your house with 2 suitcases and $847. Amanda told me figuring out my life wasn't your problem anymore. Now you miss me. The silence stretched until Sophie spoke up. Dad, what is he talking about? Why won't anyone explain what happened 6 years ago? Why don't you come in, Song? I said, finally stepping back from the door. Since you're so interested in family reunions. I led them through the foyer past the crystal chandelier and imported marble staircase into the living room, with its floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the grounds. I watched their faces as they took in the silk wallpaper, the Persian rugs, the artwork that cost more than most people's annual salaries. This place is incredible, Tyler breathed, walking to the windows. Dad, look at the pool. And is that a tennis court? Amanda was looking all right. I could practically see her calculating square footage and property values. It's certainly spacious, she said carefully. Much too big for one person. Is it? I settled into my favorite armchair, a beautiful wingback in navy blue velvet. I find I quite like having space to breathe. David sat on the edge of the sofa like he was afraid to wrinkle the fabric. Dad, about what happened 6 years ago. We were dealing with a lot of stress. New mortgage, my job situation was uncertain. Amanda was working full-time with 2 small kids. So naturally, the solution was to make your widowed father homeless. I finished. Very logical. We thought you'd figure something out, Amanda said defensively. You're so capable, so independent. We never imagined you'd end up in a motel. You never imagined it because you never bothered to check, I replied. For 6 months, you drove past the Riverside Inn every day going to work. You knew exactly where I was living and you never once stopped. Sophie was studying a family photo on the side table, one of the few pictures I'd kept from my old life. It showed David as a young boy, maybe 9 years old, sitting on my lap while I read him a bedtime story. Dad, you were really little, she said softly. That was taken right after your grandmother left us. I told her. Your dad and I lived alone for 8 years. I worked 3 jobs to keep us afloat. Made sure he had everything he needed for school sports, college applications. I looked directly at David. I thought that meant something. It did mean something, David said quietly. It means everything. That's why we're here. No, I said firmly. You're here because you want something. The question is, are you going to be honest about what it is, or are we going to keep pretending this is about missed family connections? Amanda's patience was clearly wearing thin. Fine, she snapped. Yes, we need help. David lost his job 6 months ago. We're behind on the mortgage and Tyler needs money for college prep courses. Lost his job, I repeated. Interesting way to phrase being fired for falsifying expense reports. David's face went white. How did you know that? I know things, David. I know Amanda opened 4 new credit cards last year and maxed them out on designer clothes and spa treatments. I know you refinanced your house twice to pay for that European vacation. I know you're not just behind on your mortgage. You're facing foreclosure next month. The silence in the room was deafening. I also know, I continued, that you drove by my motel every single day for 6 months after you threw me out. You knew exactly where I was living and exactly how much I was struggling, and you never once stopped to check if I was okay. Tyler's eyes filled with tears. Dad, is that true? David couldn't look at his son. Amanda, however, had switched to full attack mode. Fine. So we made mistakes. So did you. You could have asked for help instead of disappearing for 6 years. Asked for help, I said quietly. From the people who told me figuring out my life wasn't their problem anymore, from the daughter-in-law who called me a burden they couldn't afford to carry. We were young. We were stressed. You were cruel, I said simply. And now you want me to pretend it never happened because you need something from me. Sophie suddenly stood up, her face flushed with anger. This is messed up, she said, her voice cracking. Dad, you told us Grandpa Robert moved to Arizona to be near his brother. You said he didn't want to see us anymore. We never said that exactly, David started. Yes, you did. Tyler jumped up too, his voice rising. You made us think he abandoned us. I felt a surge of vindication mixed with sadness. These children had been lied to for 6 years, robbed of their grandfather because their parents were too proud to admit what they'd done. There's something else you should know, I said softly. About 8 months after I moved out, your father came to see me. Amanda's head snapped toward David. What? You didn't tell her? I asked David, genuinely surprised. How interesting. David was sweating now, his polo shirt sticking to his back. Dad, please. But the truth was going to come out. It was time for this family to understand exactly what kind of people they really were. He showed up at my apartment on a Tuesday evening. I continued watching Amanda's face carefully. He'd been drinking and he was crying. Said he missed me, that he'd made a terrible mistake, that he wanted me to come home. You're lying, Amanda said, but her voice was uncertain. I pulled out my phone and scrolled to an old photo. I took a picture of the letter he wrote me that night. Would you like me to read it out loud? The letter was 3 pages long, handwritten on legal pad paper. In it, David apologized profusely for letting Amanda convince him to throw me out. He admitted that he missed me desperately, that the house felt empty without me, that he realized he'd chosen his wife's convenience over his father's well-being. But the most damning part was the last paragraph, where he begged me not to tell Amanda about his visit because she's already threatened to leave me if I try to bring you back. He chose you, I told Amanda calmly. He chose keeping you happy over doing the right thing by his father. And for 6 years, he's been lying to all of you about it. Amanda turned to David, her face a mask of fury. You went behind my back. You wrote her a letter. I was drunk, David mumbled. I wasn't thinking clearly. No, I said. You were thinking clearly for the first time in months. That's what scared you. Tyler was crying openly now. 6 years, he whispered. We missed 6 years with you because of their lies. But here's the thing, I said, standing up and smoothing down my silk shirt. I'm not the same man who got thrown out 6 years ago. That man was broken, dependent, willing to accept crumbs of affection from people who saw him as a burden. I walked to the window, looking out at my perfectly manicured grounds. This man owns a multi-million-dollar business. This man has employees who depend on him, partners who respect him, and investments that generate more income in a month than your father made in a year when he had a job. I turned back to face them. This man doesn't need anything from anyone, especially not from people who threw him away like garbage and now want to move into his house because they've mismanaged their own lives. The silence stretched until Sophie spoke up, her voice small. So you don't want a relationship with us even now that you know we were lied to? The question broke my heart, but I kept my expression neutral. I want a relationship with you and Tyler. You're innocent victims in this situation. But your parents... I looked directly at David and Amanda. Your parents are going to have to earn their way back into my life. If they can. Amanda stood up abruptly, her mask of false sweetness finally discarded completely. This is ridiculous, she snapped. We're your family, Robert. You can't just pick and choose which parts of us you want. Watch me, I replied calmly. Fine. Amanda continued, her voice rising. You want to play games, you want to punish us for something that happened 6 years ago. We'll just leave. Come on, David. Kids, we don't need this. But Tyler didn't move. Neither did Sophie. They sat on my expensive sofa looking between their parents and me with expressions of confusion and betrayal. Actually, Sophie said quietly, I want to stay and talk to Grandpa Robert alone. Sophie, we're leaving, Amanda commanded. No. Sophie's voice was stronger now. I'm 16 years old, and I just found out you've been lying to me for 6 years about my grandfather. I want to hear his side of the story. Tyler nodded. Me too. Amanda looked like she was about to explode, but David put a hand on her arm. Maybe we should give them some time, he said quietly. Don't you dare take his side, Amanda hissed at him. I'm not taking anyone's side, David replied, but he was looking at me with something that might have been regret. I'm trying to think about what's best for our children. For a moment I saw a glimpse of the man who'd written me that letter 6 years ago, the son who'd been torn between his wife's demands and his conscience. But the moment passed quickly. Fine, Amanda said. But we're not done here, Robert. We'll be back. No, I said firmly. You won't. Not unless you're invited. This is my house, my property, and I have an excellent security system. If you show up uninvited again, I'll have you arrested for trespassing. Amanda's face went through several shades of red. You can't keep us from our children. I'm not keeping anyone from anyone, I said, but I'm also not allowing you to use them as emotional blackmail. Tyler and Sophie are welcome here anytime they want to visit. You and David are not. Not until you've proven you've changed. Proven how? David asked. I considered the question carefully. Start by telling your children the complete truth about what happened 6 years ago. Not your version, not Amanda's version. The truth. Then get your financial house in order without asking me for help. Show me you can stand on your own 2 feet like the adults you claim to be. I paused. And then maybe we can have a conversation about forgiveness. Maybe. But don't hold your breath. After they left, I sat with Tyler and Sophie for 2 hours, answering their questions, showing them photo albums from their father's childhood, and listening to their stories about school friends and dreams for the future. They were good kids despite their parents' failures, and I could see echoes of the little boy I'd raised in both of them. Can we come back next weekend? Sophie asked as I walked them to the door. Anytime you want, I promised. I have 6 years of grandfathering to catch up on. As I watched their car disappear down my long driveway, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Complete satisfaction. Not revenge exactly, but justice. The people who'd thrown me away were now the ones begging for scraps, while the man they'd discarded was living in luxury they could never afford. Sometimes the best revenge really is living well. The next morning I called Grace to tell her about the visit. How do you feel? She asked after I'd shared the whole story. I looked out at my beautiful grounds, sipped my coffee from expensive china, and considered the question carefully. I feel like I'm exactly where I belong. Finally. Tyler and Sophie returned the following weekend as promised. We spent Saturday afternoon in my conservatory, where I taught them about plant rehabilitation. They were fascinated by the process of bringing something back from the edge of death. It's like what you did with your own life, isn't it, Grandpa? Sophie observed, gently repotting a recovering orchid. Exactly like that, I agreed. They visit every other weekend now. We cook together in my oversized kitchen, swim in the pool their father used to dream about, and I tell them stories about their dad when he was their age. Real stories, not the sanitized versions their parents preferred. David and Amanda haven't contacted me since that Saturday morning. According to Tyler, they're seeing a financial counselor, and David found part-time work at a hardware store. Whether they'll ever meet my conditions for reconciliation remains to be seen. Some victories are quiet. This one was perfect. Success isn't about proving others wrong. It's about proving yourself right. When people discard you, they're not defining your worth. They're revealing their own limitations. The greatest victory isn't revenge. It's becoming so valuable that their opinion becomes irrelevant. Build your worth, not your walls. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and share your story in the comments. Your voice matters. Comment below if you've ever had family members who only showed up when you became successful. Share this video with someone who needs to hear that their worth isn't determined by people who threw them away.